Right now, you probably have somewhere close to 50 apps on your phone, a streaming service with thousands of things to watch, a podcast for literally every topic that has ever existed, and somehow you still get bored. So here's a question almost nobody ever thinks to ask. What did ancient humans actually do when they were bored? Not medieval humans, not ancient Romans, not even ancient Egyptians. We're going back much further than that. 100,000 years, 200,000 years, back before writing existed, before art, before music, before language as we currently understand it. Just people sitting there with genuinely nothing to do. And the answer to this question quietly changes a lot of what we think we know about creativity, religion, and why your brain works the way it does. But first, did boredom even exist back then at all? This is actually a real ongoing scientific debate. For a long time, researchers simply assumed our earliest ancestors were far too busy surviving to ever get bored. Every single waking hour was hunting, foraging, or building shelter. There was supposedly no downtime at all. But that assumption turned out to be wrong. Genuinely, significantly wrong. In 1966, an anthropologist named Marshall Solins published a paper that quietly flipped this entire assumption on its head. He'd spent years studying the Juhoansi people of the Kalahari Desert, one of the last groups on Earth still living something close to the original human lifestyle. And what he found was this. They worked, on average, somewhere around 15 to 20 hours a week. That's it. Not per day. Per week. The rest of their time, they rested. They talked. They sat. They did essentially nothing in particular. Solins called them the original affluent society. Not because they owned a lot of things, because they had an enormous amount of time, more genuine free time than most modern humans ever get, in an entire lifetime. So the real question isn't whether ancient humans got bored. The actual question is, what happened when they did? Let's start with the obvious one. They played. This sounds simple. It genuinely isn't. In 2010, an archaeologist named Francesco D'Erico, along with his research team, studied a collection of shells found at a site in South Africa called Blombos Cave. The shells were roughly 75,000 years old. They had small holes deliberately drilled through them, and they were coated in red ochre pigment. These weren't tools. They weren't weapons. They weren't food. They were beads. Someone had sat down 75,000 years ago with genuinely nothing better to do and made themselves jewelry. That's currently the oldest known art object in all of human history, and it appears to have started with boredom. But here's the part that's genuinely interesting. Making those beads would have taken hours, quite possibly days, drilling carefully through a shell with a simple stone tool, without electricity, without metal tools, without the kind of patience that gets built by a lifetime of easy entertainment. That's a genuinely long, tedious afternoon, and they did it anyway, because the only real alternative was staring blankly at the wall of a cave. Necessity didn't invent art. Boredom did. The exact same pattern shows up again in music. In 2008, researchers excavating a cave in southern Germany found a flute. It was carved from the bone of a vulture. It had 5 carefully spaced finger holes. It was roughly 40,000 years old. Someone 40,000 years ago, long before agriculture, before cities, before anything we'd recognize as civilization, sat down and effectively invented music. Not because they had to, because they had a free afternoon and a hollow bird bone. And it turns out music might genuinely be what the brain does when it has nothing else left to process. A neuroscientist named Daniel Levitin, who studies the origins of music, argues that musical ability is actually older than language itself. Our brains, according to this theory, were wired for rhythm and melody before we could reliably form complex sentences. Because rhythm is at its core a form of pattern recognition, and pattern recognition is genuinely what kept our ancestors alive. But boredom didn't just invent art and music. It invented something considerably more powerful than either. It invented imagination. Think about this for a second. You genuinely cannot be bored without some working concept of time. To feel bored, you have to know that this particular moment is lasting too long, that something else could plausibly be happening instead, that the future exists at all, and that it could realistically be better than right now. Boredom is, in a very real sense, The first genuine sign that a brain has developed the ability to imagine things that don't currently exist. Animals don't get bored the way humans do. A dog waiting by the door for its owner isn't bored. It's simply waiting. It doesn't hold any concept of what else it could possibly be doing instead. But a human sitting in a cave 100,000 years ago, staring blankly into a fire with nothing to do, starts to genuinely think. What if tomorrow's hunt goes wrong? What if that sound outside is a predator? What's actually beyond that distant mountain? Where do we go when we eventually die? Every question religion has ever seriously asked, every question philosophy has ever seriously asked, every question science is still right now actively trying to answer. All of them appear to have started the exact same way. Someone was bored, and their mind simply started to wander. In 2013, a psychologist named Sandy Mann published research showing that boredom significantly increases creative output. She had participants perform the single most boring task she could realistically devise, copying numbers directly out of a phone book, and then tested their creativity immediately afterward. The bored group dramatically outperformed everyone else in the study, because boredom appears to genuinely force the brain to generate its own internal stimulation, and the human brain, left entirely to its own devices, turns out to be genuinely extraordinary. But there's one more thing ancient humans consistently did whenever they were bored, and it's arguably the one that mattered most of all. They talked. Not about hunting, not about food, not about basic day-to-day logistics. An anthropologist named Robin Dunbar, the same researcher who discovered that human social groups naturally cap out at around 150 people, spent years carefully studying what humans actually talk about when they aren't discussing anything particularly important. His central finding: roughly 65% of all human conversation is essentially social gossip. Who did what? Who said what? What happened to someone you both happen to know? This sounds, on the surface, like a genuine waste of time. It really wasn't. Dunbar argues that language itself likely evolved, not primarily for practical, task-based communication, but specifically for social bonding. Before language existed, primates bonded almost entirely through physical grooming. But grooming takes real time. It's fundamentally one-to-one. You can only physically groom a single friend at any given moment. Language effectively replaced grooming. Suddenly, you could bond with 3 people at once, 10 people, an entire group gathered together around a single fire. You could tell a story about someone who wasn't even physically present. You could build real trust with people you had genuinely never once touched. Language, and by extension, human civilization itself, likely didn't emerge purely because we needed to coordinate hunts more efficiently. It emerged, at least in part, because we were sitting around with nothing else to do, and we started talking about each other instead. Boredom invented gossip, and gossip, in turn, quietly invented society itself. So here's roughly where we've ended up. 75,000 years ago, someone bored inside a cave made a bead. 40,000 years ago, someone bored inside a different cave made a flute. And somewhere in between those two moments, people sitting around fires with genuinely nothing to do started asking questions that nobody yet had answers to. About the sky. About why things are the way they seem to be. And some of those questions eventually became religion. Some of them became science. Some of them became art. And some of them, quite possibly, became you. Lying awake at 2 a.m, phone resting on your chest, thinking about nothing in particular. Here's the part almost nobody actually talks about. Modern psychology has a specific term for what happens when you try to eliminate boredom completely. They call it cognitive overload. When every single moment is externally stimulated, your brain genuinely never gets the chance to do what it was originally built to do during the quiet moments. Process, consolidate, create. The default mode network, the specific part of your brain that activates when you're doing essentially nothing, is the very same network responsible for creativity, self-reflection, and empathy. It largely only switches on when you're genuinely bored. We spent roughly 300,000 years slowly learning how to fill silence with something genuinely meaningful. Then we invented the smartphone, and we've been frantically filling that same silence ever since with something considerably less meaningful. But every single time you put the phone down and sit quietly with nothing for even a moment, Every time your mind naturally starts to wander, and you actually let it, you're doing the exact same thing the person in that cave was doing. The same basic thing that made the bead. The same basic thing that made the flute. The same basic thing that once looked up at the stars and simply started asking why. Boredom never actually held ancient humans back. It's quite possibly what made them human in the first place. And it might genuinely be doing the exact same thing for you, right now, if you actually let it.